My name is Lila Ormondi, and my ego is a liar. And guess what? Yours is too. I'm a combat veteran, mother, and recovering high performer. This is a show about the lies we tell ourselves, how they shape us, how they break us, and what it takes to finally let them go. Let's uncover our lies to seek the truths underneath. Because before there's clarity, there's chaos. Let's navigate it together. So don your oxygen mask and take a deep breath. Welcome to Lies My Ego Told Me. Welcome back, liars and truth seekers, to another episode of Lies My Ego Told Me. I'm Lilo, and today's guest is a woman who's defied convention at every turn. Kathleen Perley is a linguist-turned-entrepreneur, a Fulbright scholar, and a recognized thought leader in artificial intelligence. She built and sold a multimillion-dollar digital agency, is the CEO of Demystify, spelled with an AI strategy firm, and is an adjunct professor at Rice University. And she just released her book in her spare time called AI Made Simple, Results Made Real. She's a mom, a builder, an educator, a barrier breaker. But like all of us, she also believed a lie. And what makes her story so powerful is that the very thing she once saw as a limitation became her edge. She turned what others believed was kryptonite into her superpower. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share a little bit of my story, and hopefully anyone who's been telling themselves that they can't, maybe will start to see that the thing that they thought might hold them back is maybe what will actually propel them forward.
I love that. And you are a woman who spent your life pushing boundaries academically, professionally, and intellectually. And yet for much of your life, you carried a belief that shaped how you saw yourself, especially in comparison to others. So tell us, what is the lie that you were telling yourself?
The lie I was telling myself was really my learning disabilities, my dyslexia, my ADHD, my dysgraphia. Those are things that made me different. And I, for a while, really truly believed that different meant I was defected. And I think what I've realized over time is that's really not the case, that, some of these things don't necessarily make you less likely to achieve success. But it also actually can be used to really help harness and bring a new way of thinking to individuals who don't think like you, right? And so I think it really has been something I've struggled with. I still struggle with at times. And now I've kind of really started to trust that process. It's not always beautiful. I always joke it's like a swirling dervish of chaos sometimes in my brain. But somehow something comes out of it that's pretty amazing. And so I've just started to lean into it and trust that process.
And where did that belief begin? Was it as a child in the classroom? Was it peers?
So, I think, I didn't read until I was in the 5th grade. I did not learn how to read. So in 4th grade, my teacher finally figured out that I was just memorizing context clues around auditory processing. So I'd listen to what was going on in class, pick up some cues, and then actually use that to answer questions or read in class when I was called on. And so I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia until I was in 5th grade. And up until then, I got a lot of commentary around teachers, parents, my dad in particular, just thinking I was lazy or wasn't interested. My mom was always a big champion of mine, which has been great. She was like, I don't know what you're going to do, but I know you're going to do something amazing and you're going to be probably one of the most successful people I've ever met. And so, it was really difficult. I think the other thing, having my mom in my corner and telling me, that I could and that I was going to be successful and that she did think I was smart, it was a huge asset because there were so many times where I wanted just to give up when things got hard. And she really allowed me to explore and lean into my creativity and my pattern recognition, as well as, also kind of push me when, I didn't want to do some of the things that I needed to really work and build the skills to cope with my learning disabilities, which I think is a huge help.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about pattern recognition. So what are those other early signs that you saw in yourself? I don't even know if at 4th grade you can really recognize those types of symptoms, patterns, or how did you know you were quote unquote different?
I couldn't spell to save my life. I constantly flipped around letters and words, never knew my left from my right or a B from a D. To this day, at times, when I'm driving, I still have to go wait, hon, left, right, or bed, B and Ds, just to make sure. And it's interesting. As I've grown older, it's becoming more and more apparent. When I actually was interviewing with the deans for the position at Rice, they made a comment to me during the interview process that they really appreciated and were excited about bringing a nonlinear thinker to the table. And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, you're like, how you look at problems isn't a linear fashion. Like you seem to like look at it from like a 3D 360 perspective, and how you start to think about solving it isn't in any way, shape, or form logical initially to some folks who are trying to follow along. And so I think I've started just to trust that, I am different. And over time, that doesn't mean I'm less than or not smart, but just have a different way of approaching things. And it's interesting. Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, well, do you think you're smart now? And I didn't know how to answer that, because I was like, I just think, I don't think I'm dumb, but I don't think I'm smart. Mm-hmm. I like solving problems, and like everything's a puzzle to me, and I enjoy that. And so I've just leaned in to keep doing that.
Yeah. Because what's the measure of smart?
Yeah.
Like IQ tests, Mensa, and SAT. Like, what does that even mean?
Exactly. That's where I was like, it's such a hard thing to define. And I think my issue and my strength is my brain sometimes acts like that book that you read as a kid. If you give a mouse a cookie, it's like I'll start thinking about one thing, and then that thing opens up like another thing that then opens, and it just keeps going. Or think about in terms of like web browsers, right? It's like a new tab, pop up, new tab, constantly in my brain, and it's messy, but it's just how it works, and there's not anything wrong with it.
And you were diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, which now, as children of the 80s and 90s, dyslexia is better understood. But You're also diagnosed with dysgraphia, which I was unfamiliar with. And that's language that didn't even exist probably till more recently. So what is dysgraphia, and like, how did you come to terms with all of these diagnoses and then begin to make sense of the world and begin to have a healthy relationship with your brain and the way that you think?
Dysgraphia really focuses more on like the fine motor movements, and really kind of some challenges around really strictly writing. If you were to look at my notebook, it looks like my 7-year-old son wrote most of my notes. It's pretty rough. And it turns out I ended up having a ligament issue, a genetic issue that makes it hard for me to like hold my pencil or pen. Another random fun fact, if you really want to frustrate me, throw a bunch of pennies on a table and ask me to pick them up without sliding them off the side. It takes me forever. And I think, it's still an ongoing journey. My son has been recently diagnosed with ADHD, and as I'm learning and discovering more with him, I'm starting to realize and learn more about myself. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that a lot of individuals don't realize is your frame of reference of normal. So I knew in school I wasn't set up for success. Like I knew I was different, but I didn't really understand how or why. And I didn't know what was more of an aspect of my learning difference, like my dyslexia or my ADHD or my dysgraphia, and what was a character flaw, if you will. Mm-hmm. ADHD, I wasn't diagnosed until college. And I feel like even in the last 3 years, I've learned more about that and understanding. And it's such a relief in a way to know that it's not me in a way. Like I thought I was lazy. I thought I was stupid, those types of things, right? Where I was talking to somebody who had ADHD, and another woman in her 40s who was diagnosed late. And she's been a good friend of mine. And she was like, make a list of everything you should do, but you don't do. And I was like, God, I'm terrible at taking medicine. Like terrible at taking medicine. I hate taking a shower. Like I hate it more than anything. And like sometimes I just forget about it. I did shower for you today.
That's really nice.
Feels very special. But like I don't form habits.
That's interesting.
Talks about like, oh, if you do something for 2 weeks, you can form a habit. No, that doesn't work for me in that way. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And when I was talking to this other woman who has ADHD, she was like, oh no, that's your ADHD, right? Like your medication management. She was like, brushing your teeth too, showering. I was like, how did you know? And she was like, yeah, we all have that. And so to really start to understand that I wasn't a bad person because I sometimes forgot to take my medicine or brush my teeth, or 4 days later realize I haven't showered in a couple days, right? It was something else that was kind of contributing to that. And not that you don't just like lean into it and I don't have dreadlocks, right? Like I'm not going to that extreme, but really finding a way to manage it. And talk about habits, right? My sister's very structured and she would be like, why don't you just like set an alarm? And I would. So I have thousands of alarms. If anyone who's ADHD, they have thousands of alarms. But I also over time will tune it out and like ignore it.
Yes.
And so, I'm constantly trying to like game myself in a way.
It's really funny because I'm like, wait, do I have ADHD too? Are we all on the spectrum?
Well, and it's funny. My son, with his diagnosis, my husband and I were talking, we got a call from school. And as any parent, right? Like, we're not the parents that are like Harvard, Princeton. Like my goal is like a normal functioning human, non-sociopath, and we're good. And we got a call from the teacher that he had told her he acted up in class or something. And his response when she asked him why was like, there's a voice in my head that tells me to be a bad boy, even though I want to be a good boy. And I was like, oh, that's terrifying. And my husband and I were talking about it and I was like, God, like, and my husband was like, do you think he actually hears the voice? And I was like, well, like that narrative voice that's like constantly going in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have it. Like, I was like, so it's like silence? Like in your brain, like when you lay down to bed, because that's when I hear mine the most. And he was like, I don't think about anything. I just go to sleep. And I was like, what? I had no idea that not everyone had that.
Yeah. The more you know. Yeah.
The more you know.
But that's your normal, right?
Yeah. And so you just don't have a frame of reference for anything else.
Mm-hmm. And so not being able to read until 5th grade, right? Not being able to hold a pencil properly, not being able to develop habits, probably pay attention in class. And you told me once that you had a teacher that's like, you're never going to go to college. It was probably so easy for them to just dismiss the possibility of any potential for you. You told us earlier that your mom was your biggest champion. So tell us about her, because she's a powerhouse in her own right, who she was and what did she see in you that others didn't, other than, you're my child and you're going to do great things.
When I was diagnosed, I was told 2 things. One, I should never learn a second language because it would be too confusing, as I was already struggling with the English language. But I really wanted to learn Spanish, and my mom was like, go for it. Follow your heart. And when I was getting close to going to college, so probably my sophomore year of high school, the college counselor at our school told me I shouldn't go. And it wasn't even you shouldn't go. It was don't waste your parents' money on a 4-year institution because you're not going to make it. And my mom was very opposed to that. And I think what my mom saw is that a few things, right? As somebody who couldn't read, right? I mean, I made it to 5th grade or end of 4th grade before anyone figured out that I couldn't read. So my mom was probably like, all right, she's got something, like, the ability to like pull that off for this long is pretty impressive, right?
A golf clap.
Yeah,
almost,
right.
Well done.
Yeah. And, and I was always negotiating things and very strategic in how I thought about stuff. And so my mom was like, listen, you might not be have a traditional career path, but you are like, if you work hard and you love what you do and you find it interesting, you'll be immensely successful. Mm-hmm. And she really instilled that in me as well. I mean, she was a female in the oil and gas sector in the 80s, in the 90s. And, so, as a lobbyist initially for the National Association of Manufacturers. So she's probably one of the only females in the room. She never got a law degree, even though she felt like she should have, mainly because she was the baby of 7 and couldn't afford to go to law school. And, my mom rose through the ranks and ended up being a senior executive at Marathon Oil. And, when I'd ask her about it, she would share, my dad was book smart. He went to Princeton, then went to Wharton, did mergers and acquisitions, brilliant. And my mom, at the end of the day, when you think about the journeys, was very successful, and some would argue more successful than my father, because she worked hard, because she cared about what she did, because she cared about solving challenges and problems in a way where there were more than one solution that really maybe initially met the eye. And so I think she saw that ability to overcome, that you didn't have to be the traditional book smart to be successful in a career. And having her negotiate with the school to have tutors come in where I could, and remember at the very beginning, one of the first things they taught you, and this is going to kind of date me, is spelling was like a big issue for me. And in hindsight, I'm like, what is going on in the schooling where they like care more about the spelling of a word than like the idea of what I'm trying to convey in terms of the value? But one of the first things I learned was to use, to like speed look up words in the dictionary. I took a lot of Latin to be able to find like prefixes, suffixes, to be able to find words quickly in the dictionary. And so we had a timer, and the goal was to get under a minute to find any word in the dictionary at like rapid speed so I can verify the spelling. Now completely useless, right? Completely useless. Maybe a good party trick on occasion. But it just goes to show how technology is a way to kind of level that playing field, right? I'm no longer having to look up words. And I will tell you now, it's funny, as I teach, no one's looking at my spelling. It's what is the core of the idea and the thought, and where's their value in that?
I love that your mom was defying social norms then, because clearly she raised a daughter to continue to defy. I feel like defiance is like the common thread through the women in your family, because after you graduated high school, you went and studied linguistics, which is the exact thing that they told you not to do, right? And you earned a Fulbright. And then you went to Spain to learn Spanish, which is what you wanted to do, right? And then you researched phonetics, which clearly you had an affinity for at a young age. Weird, but okay. And then second language acquisition. So what did that chapter of your life teach you about communication? And like, how did you learn to continue to process the world around you?
I mean, I think one thing that I realized that it's kind of funny, because I joke with my husband, just, if you want me to do something, tell me I can't. Because then I'll definitely do it. Because I do have a bit of a chip on my shoulder in terms of wanting to prove others wrong. Being brutally honest with myself, I do think there's a good part of that. The other side of it, though, also is just, I am very interested in understanding what is difficult for me. Like I'm not comfortable with just being like, I don't get that, right? Like I want to seek to understand it. And so that is why I studied what I did. Once language became math in a way, it was easy. It was formulaic in a way, not deterministic, but definitely a little bit more formulaic than I anticipated. And so when I looked at some of the barriers that exist when I was graduating, obviously when you look at how we've moved into more of a global world, language was one of those. And, one of the things that continues to fascinate me and what I'm working on now actually is, if you have a non-native speaker trying to learn a second language or trying to communicate in a different language, there's a lot of subconscious bias that goes into kind of that reception of that information. And so that's what really drove kind of my initial interest, was really trying to understand how my brain worked, possibly be able to take some of those learnings and apply it and create something that others could learn from. And it really shaped my interest in, people will say innovation or research. More for me, it's this huge passion I have for discovery and understanding. And I think that's what's fueled everything I've done since then.
And it goes right back to that passion for discovery, is that you realize that coding is just another language, right? I mean, even better for you, it's math because it's numbers.
Yes.
So talk to me about that, how that linguistic foundation that you would establish in speaking and studying languages led you to technology and then eventually your passion of AI?
Yeah. So I will say my mom has been a big driving force for me, and she was in this as well. So I finished my Fulbright, and I had every intention of going to get my PhD and being a cool professor and having fun, and really just being able to be a full-time nerd. I moved home. I had about, I think it was like 6 to 7 months before my PhD program started.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved home into my parents' house, and my mom, who's a New Yorker, baby of 7, was like, if you think you're living in this roof, under this roof without a job, think again. Like, like you have to get a job. Like, I don't care how much you make. I don't care what you do, but you're not sitting here on your butt until your PhD program starts. And I'm like, Mom, I'm going to get my PhD. Like, it's not like and she's like, nope, I don't care. You got to do something. And I'm so appreciative. And when I remember talking to her about it vividly, because I kept asking, I was very perplexed and wanting to understand, she was in government affairs and then eventually moved into more of an HR role, which is slightly terrifying given my mom cursed like the sailor from New York. So, but
I love her already.
Yeah, she was something else. But it just found like her career was so well suited for her. Like, and she rocked it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always like, how did you know that that's what you wanted to do? How did you? And my mom would tell me, sometimes choice can be paralyzing, and the absence of choice is, like, I had no idea. I had to get a job. And so I got a job and I did this, and then I fell in love with that part of this. And then I kept exploring it. And so, I think my mom forcing me to get a job really pushed me to take out choice to really discover. And I remember it was 2010, I believe, when I finished my Fulbright, 2011. The job market was terrible. Nobody was hiring. And at first I was kind of being a little snooty about what I wanted to do. And then I finally got a job offer from a startup automotive digital advertising agency where I worked like literally out of a car dealership in something I had no clue what I was doing. The job, I think, initially talked about like interactive marketing and advertising. And I was like, I like to interact. That'll be fine. Turns out first assignment was like build a website. And I was like, ooh, cool.
So that's what that means.
That's what that means. But the nice thing is I had no concern about failing either, because I was like, this is a 6-month gig. And then I'm going to go get my PhD. But I got into it and I realized, I was transcribing disordered speech and language for 5 years by then. And coding was no different in a lot of ways. And it became fun. And you could build things and then interact with them. And so that's really drived my kind of interest and value within that. And then you bring in that transition, right? God, would I have loved to have been in AI in 2015? Yes. It did not pay well enough for me to move out of my parents' house. So it's definitely not where I went. And it was so expensive to get access to. And so, especially we started really digging into AI in 2015, 2016, with natural language processing, some things within healthcare, propensity modeling from that perspective. And it got back to the passion that I loved from the very beginning. There's a linguist that's like one of my favorites, and it's this idea that you should know a word by the company it keeps, which is exactly what I did with my dyslexia. I couldn't read, but what I would do is I would decipher certain words around it to then understand the context, even if I couldn't read it all.
Yeah.
And that aspect of language and how changing one simple word can completely transform a message is fascinating to me and very mathematical in a way. And so when, 2022, when things became more democratized and not an arm and a leg and needing hundreds of millions of funding to get access to these tools, I really leaned into it, and we were leveraging it quite heavily at the firm before I sold, and then got to nerd out full time. And I feel like I'm still learning and growing in that journey.
So yeah, needless to say, you abandoned the PhD, right?
I did. But the irony is, I will tell you, like this weekend I was in class and I was like, maybe I should get my PhD. Like maybe I'm going to go full circle. And my husband, I think just the color ran out of his face because he was like, God, no, Kathleen, focus.
And so in 2022, is that when you start Decode?
Yeah. So I started Decode in 2013. So I worked at that startup automotive agency. I learned a ton. I am extremely grateful for that opportunity and experience. I remember the CEO of the company, when he hired me and I accepted the offer and he was telling me about the job description, I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Sure. And he was like, well, I'm not going to pay you much. And I was like, perfect. I just need a job to stay at my mom's house. Like, I'm glad we're in agreement here. This could possibly blow up in our face and like no harm, no foul. Like, I'm not coming in here pretending that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I was given far more responsibility than my skill set or my experience warranted. But because of that, I learned a ton. And I think so oftentimes the biggest barrier is taking that first step and just being thrown into the deep end. So I was there for about 2 years. I remember the days, like it built a lot of resiliency. Car dealers are a fun crew to work with in terms of having them as clients and or working in their facilities. I remember many nights where they'd be on a hot streak, so they don't change the music. So it's like the same song on repeat in the entire office building. And you're just like, I'm going to go crazy if I hear. Thank goodness it wasn't like Sarah McLachlan, but sometimes it felt like it was like on repeat. And so I was there for about 2 years. And then oddly enough, on a flight home from a conference in Detroit, I was sitting between two guys on Southwest in the middle seat because my boss used to do this thing. And if he's listening, it's going to be embarrassing because now he knows. He would occasionally try to get me to like sit next to him. He had A class, obviously. And so he'd like be like, oh, saved you a seat, and like want me to sit next to him. And then he'd try to like talk about work the whole way home. And I just was tired and I didn't want to do it that day. And so I just took the first middle seat I could find. And so before I made eye contact, so I could just check out, to be honest. And oh man, I hope he doesn't hear this. I mean, it's been a while. I'm sure it's fine now. And I just pulled out, I was studying for my Google Analytics certification. And I was just studying, and these two guys were on either side kind of talking. They knew each other. They were talking over, like, past me a little bit. And probably 15 minutes into the flight, they were like, so what are you studying? And I was like, oh, I'm getting recertified in my Google Analytics and my AdWords and stuff like that. And he, started asking me about schema and SEO because that's kind of what I was focusing on a lot, given my linguistic background. It made sense. And then he asked me a question like, what are your thoughts on like international and how you'd structure that? And I kind of, just talked about some of my random thoughts around that. We're about 30 minutes from landing and they're asking me questions. They're slacking, or back up in the day, messaging their teams, being like, hey, have you thought about this? And have you done this? And I was like, what is going on? Turns out it was the chairman and president of a major cybersecurity firm. And they offered me a job before they got off the plane. And I thought to myself, like, if I can convince two strangers on a flight from Detroit to Kansas City to trust me with their work, why don't I just try it? Why don't I just go out on my own and work with clients that I want to work with and make a difference and help? And so their head of HR called me a couple days later and basically told me, they're like, I was told I have to hire you. So this is a formality and I just need to know what you want so I can hire you. And I told them, well, I've been thinking about starting my own business and I think this is what I'm going to do. And, I really appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to turn it down. And they offered to be my first client, which was incredible. And so, I will say, for like every 6 months, they tried to like convince me that being an entrepreneur was not the best idea. And they would try to hire me on. That was, I think, their long-term goal was like that process. And that's how Decode was started.
It's the continued streak of defiance that you have, where you have to be a rebel.
A little bit. Yeah, I do have to be a little bit of a rebel, a little bit of a contrarian, if you will.
So you build Decode up and it becomes this wildly successful digital agency, and then you sell it. So what was the best part of building something that turned out to be so successful and proved that you could make it work? And then what was the hardest part of letting your first baby go?
God. The most fulfilling part was building something that I was truly passionate about and that I believed in. I built Decode primarily because I wanted people to understand how digital marketing and advertising worked. I didn't want to make money and work with clients who didn't want to understand the tech behind it. I wanted them to understand it because I wanted them to challenge me in a way too, right? I wanted it to be like flywheel of advancement. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't like the smoke and mirrors that existed in the world of digital at the time, where I was leaning back into my professor kind of like nerdiness and wanting to like, we offer this, but I want to be able to educate people on it too. Like, I don't want people to use our stuff because they're not sure and they're just like throwing up their hands. I want them to feel empowered by this tech. And so, that was probably the most fulfilling thing. And then we started working in healthcare, which was incredibly powerful in terms of helping patients find care that they didn't know existed.
Okay.
And options. And so it was very, very fulfilling in a lot of ways. And letting go of the baby was very hard. My mom passed away in 2018. And before she passed, she made a comment to me that, I know you run hard and I want you to know that, she was like, I truly think that part of this cancer was due to the fact that I never gave time for myself. Mm-hmm. And I don't want you to end up in the same boat. And so that kind of was a bit of a wake-up call. For a short period of time, she passed. I was 3 months pregnant, had a baby, my little boy Everett, who just turned 7 on Saturday. And my husband ended up having a stent placed in his brain. He had an aneurysm. And it was like another wake-up call, in a way of like, you need to focus on what fulfills you and not be thrown into what feels like a happy place, which is nerding out. And so part of the reason was me, right? I felt like I was missing out on a lot and maybe not there for my family where I needed to be. The second was we had grown to about 75 employees at the time. And I was the CEO, and I've never been a CEO before. I was an accidental one. And I felt like I wasn't good enough. And I thought, I'm currently doing a disservice to my team who I genuinely loved and was so proud of. And I felt like with me at the helm, they weren't getting the national notoriety that they deserved. And so that's really what pushed me to sell. Now, once I sold, when I decided to finally leave the company, because I stayed on for about a year and was leading the innovation side of things, I remember vividly having coffee with a friend of mine, and I was unhappy, right? When you build something, it's like when you have renters, right? Like you're just like, oh no, they put the soap in the wrong spot. This is not how this works. Like we were built on excellence, and like this is a personal reflection of me. Yeah. Like everything that went out of the office felt like a personal reflection on me. And I remember I just couldn't let it go. And I knew I needed to, like in theory, if I was going to stay on, to care less about what I was doing work-wise. I just am not capable of it.
Yeah.
A friend said, Kathleen, you could either like continue to beat your head against this wall or you can leave. And I was so nervous to leave my team. Like I felt like I was abandoning them a bit. My friend made a comment to me and he goes, maybe by you leaving finally gives them the permission to do what's best for them too. And actually you staying is probably the worst thing for them. Mm-hmm. He and I had coffee on Thursday or Friday, and I resigned Monday. It was hard. And there was a good period of time afterwards where I was like, did I peak? What's next? Will anyone ever hire me, or will I ever do anything of value ever again?
Mm-hmm. It's just interesting to hear you talk about the way that you approach problem solving, the way that you approach leadership too, because you talked about even AI in the beginning of this, it wasn't democratized yet, right? And the way that you ran your company was more about giving people more access, being less elusive, being more transparent for them, giving people more options. And even your choice to, instead of taking the job from that CEO and that chairman, you just started your own company. It's incredible because it's almost like your barriers, your differences are really the things that just kind of gave you that edge, that give you this special gift. Because I think most people would be really scared. They take the job, right? It's the safe bet.
You're 100% right. And I think my sister and I were best of friends, but we couldn't be more polar opposite. She was graduating high school and she had like, a 5-year plan. And, it was like, I'm going to go to a top undergrad bit with a business program. And then I'm going to go work in New York City at a investment bank. And then I'm going to do private equity. And then I'm going to go to a top ranked MBA program. And then I'm going to like move to a private equity firm again. And meanwhile, I was like, I felt like I joke. I was graduating. I earned a dual degree in dyslexia and dysgraphia. Like that was my impressive, accomplishment out of high school. But it is a gift in a way. And I remember my sister and I talking once. She was struggling with getting pregnant and she was sharing, she's like, I've never felt like such a failure. And it was like, what? Like, that's such a weird thing to equate it to. And then she said something, she's like, and at first I was like, hey, she's like, it's different. Like, you fail all the time. Like, you're not afraid of failing because it happens all the time for you. And I was like, ouch. But like, you're right. Like, it's true. And so I think, having dyslexia and dysgraphia, like, in a way, created this space for me where no one expected, except, I think my mom was obviously a huge champion, but for the most part, no one expected anything from me. And that kind of was somewhat freeing in a way.
Yeah.
And then when you fail all the time, like multiple times a day, you build a resilience. And I like to joke, like a bounce back that's like super fast. And it's funny, my brother-in-law even said to me once, he was like, people could tell you that your idea or your business is like the dumbest idea ever, and they think it's like terrible. And you'll be upset for like 3 minutes. And then you're like, I'm going to prove them wrong. And like, you just bounce right back from it. And I was, so I do think there is a bit of a gift there in terms of being creative and how you get from point A to point B. And I had no fear of failure because I was failing all the time. So what would be any different?
Yeah. But you're also like self-aware. The fact that like there wasn't ego attached to staying with the company. You knew what was best for that company. You cared what was best for those people. And you knew that you leaving, even though it was heartbreaking, even though it was yours, it was the best decision. And most people don't have that self-awareness.
I will say, thanks to a lot of therapy from my mom growing up from all these learning disabilities, and it does make you more self-aware. And I think that is so freeing. And it's interesting. I talk to a lot of folks now, and I still have imposter syndrome, but I don't try to be anything that I'm not. Right? I gave up when I started my own business and I was in charge for the most part. You get to a point where you're like, yeah, I'm a hot mess. Like I'm sheer, like a swirling dervish of chaos 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to hide it from anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to like try to like put a mask on and be like, yeah, give me your numbers and let me edit the final deck. That's a terrible idea. Don't ever let me do that. Yeah. And so there's something so freeing about it too.
You told me once, and I'm going to read this quote because I took it from a previous conversation that we had. You said, the way I think is the reason I see possibilities other people miss. And that's kind of what led you to step into a new space, which was AI consulting, strategy, and education. So what part of your old brain, the one that you used to criticize, the one that, people told you and you sometimes believe was going to hold you back, how did that become your unfair advantage in this new world?
I think it's really focused on, and it's funny because I feel like agentic AI kind of works in this way too, right? I was focused on outcomes, right? Like I knew I had to pass a class, right? Or get a certain grade on a spelling test. And so normal people would like, okay, I'm going to make flashcards. I'm going to study and I'm going to do this. I was like, okay, I have to get from here to here. What are the 7 different ways can I do that? Do I walk the teacher's dog after class to get me extra credit on the exam? Like, I don't know, like anything, nothing's out of the realm of possible. And you are laughing, but I have done that. And it did help me pass a class in college because I walked my professor's dogs. And so I think like the ability when you have to get from point A to point B, but the traditional means of doing it aren't working for you, you have to be creative and you have to build resilience and an openness to and in a way, like constant iterative hypothesis testing. Mm-hmm. And that has really, I think, served me so well, especially in this world of AI that is non-deterministic, and what worked yesterday is not going to work today, and no one knows. There is no rule book. Because in my brain, my whole life, there's never been a real rule book on how to use it, no manual, if you will. And this new tech doesn't have it either. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that, why I've gone into teaching at Rice and what I'm very passionate about is I often felt like my ideas were trapped in my brain in a way, and I could never communicate them clearly. And so what I get excited about when I teach and when I see it come to life, I teach at the business school to non-technical folks, is what truly is going to move us forward with this new technology isn't going to necessarily come from the developers. It's going to come from people who have a unique understanding of an industry or a challenge or a problem, who genuinely care about it getting solved. Mm-hmm. And there's so much value in that. And I've already started to see some of it come to life. And it's what makes me get excited to teach again, is just solving some of these challenges or barriers with this new technology by people who maybe thought they couldn't.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that Rice hired you because you're a nonlinear thinker, right?
Yeah. They're now seeing how nonlinear that sometimes is. But yeah.
Do you think society's definition of intelligence is finally starting to shift, or do you think it's kind of just surrounded in academia?
I'm hoping it's starting to shift, and it has to in a way, right? When you look at the new technology that's being rolled out with the frontier models, it's performing at and or above a PhD level in their own field with access to the internet. So intelligence in the form of book smarts is becoming commoditized. And what's interesting and I think far more valuable is individuals who know how to critically think, who in essence, right, who can look at a situation or a problem and know how to set up the formula, if you will. Mm-hmm. Like, what are our levers? What's the challenge? What can I use or not use to help me solve this problem? Because being able to execute on the formula aspect of it in terms of how it, from a mathematics perspective or problem-solving perspective, can be done with artificial intelligence. So it's really about understanding and reframing the idea.
And when I read an article that you wrote, it was called Empowering Diverse Minds, AI's Role in Creating a More Accessible World. This triggered a bunch of conversations between you and I, and really made me an adopter of AI. It's become my side hobby this year, is learning as much as I can about AI prompt engineering. But we talked about it in the sense of education. We talked about it in the sense of parents of children who are in education systems that still test and educate traditionally. And your son, as you mentioned, has ADHD and dyslexia. How are we going to go into this next generation of testing and educating our children, knowing that all these differences exist, and really is the model that we have an acceptable one for intelligence and capability, when we really need to be developing strategic and logical thinkers?
I don't think the system we have today is, unfortunately. And I think one of the saddest byproducts of what's going on today is, if I wouldn't have had my mom, who was my champion, who pushed, who believed in me and would tell me that I'm smart when I questioned myself, it is a very self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you're in school and you're told that you're not smart or you're not capable or you get a bad score, to throw up your hands and start to believe in that, and then to start kind of self-fulfilling that in a way. And so I do think we really need to rethink how we educate and focus more on developing critical thinking, as you mentioned, logic, but more importantly, curiosity. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, I've talked to some people and they're like, you can't develop curiosity. It's either in you or it's not. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that's true. One of the things I challenge educators to think about is, how do you focus on the concepts that you're trying to teach and allow that curiosity to help fuel that learning process? Mm-hmm. So whether you're talking about, for example, when I was 8 or 9, right, like I loved meteorology. So don't try to teach me math in a way that talks about like frickin' trains. Like there's a great meme on you have ADHD when they're like, John took the train 30 miles to so-and-so at this many miles per hour, and, gets there. What time will he arrive if he leaves at this, if the train's moving at this many, and I'm like, at 30 miles, and I'm like, why isn't he driving? It's not that far. And if he would go way faster than 30 miles an hour, that's where my brain would go. It still does. Right?
This is America. We don't take trains.
Yeah. I'm like, why would you take a train if you could drive faster? That's silly. Why would you ever do that? But that's where my brain would go. And so I think, being able to take and apply it in a way, and the adaptability and personalization of learning grows immensely with this technology. Mm-hmm. I talk a lot to faculty about the view of AI as cheating. Mm-hmm. And I think, listen, don't get me wrong, could be a challenge, right? You need to work the muscle a bit, but it's no different than any other tech, right? Yeah. If I want something to really stick in my brain, I hand write it down. And with my dysgraphia, that's a pretty long time to do. But if I want it to stick, I have to manually, tactilely touch it in a way.
Yeah.
If I want it to save as knowledge. And so I understand the need to make sure that we don't build too much of an over-reliance on AI being an output machine, but really start using it more as a strategic partner to challenge, to push, to reframe our thinking in the status quo. But I think there's a huge opportunity, and I tell a lot of my professors, my econ professor, who's amazing, right? Has a pretty strict rule on AI, and I was like, I wrote my my paper, but you have restrictions on this font, this margins, that, whatever. It's I wrote everything. Can I use AI? Because I'm 3 paragraphs over your page length, mm-hmm. just to tighten it up a bit. And I think when people start to understand that AI can be used in a lot of ways that isn't cheating or is another way of thinking about it, it's hugely helpful. And I think it will be extremely beneficial, and I hope give a lot of young students or lifelong learners a huge opportunity to lean into that.
Yeah, and I do see it as a way to democratize, and I do see it as a way to level the playing field, particularly with kids who do have learning disabilities or even just whatever barrier they have to their education. If we build AI with, empathy and accessibility in mind, what kind of future becomes possible?
What's fascinating is, this won't surprise you, but the new project I've been working on, we're in stealth mode, but we're focused on AI and investor relations. And what triggered my passion for it was the value of voice and the data that's shared in voice. Mm. And our first beta client that we've been working with, there's a non-native speaker who does the earnings calls. And when you layer that in terms of his voice, and, obviously sales side analysts are listening in, trying to identify the health of the company and its trajectory. His speech of, a little bit of upspeak and uncertainty that was coming across in his voice wasn't uncertainty about the business or the business strategy. It's because he's not operating in his native language. So the uncertainty was around word choice and things of that nature. And so it's really fascinating to think about. And I don't think any sales side bank is intentionally taking that data and discounting the company. But I think there is subconsciousness that goes into that in terms of that.
Right.
Well, I hear a little bit of uncertainty, and I'm going to maybe have a little bit different of an opinion on what this might look like. And so there's so many different things that this can come into, and creating that level playing field, whether it's a non-native speaker, and we look at more of a globalized business economy, to females who are stepping in, who have different vocal qualities that have been a little bit more behavior driven just because of how our society works, but can be misconstrued as uncertain or lacking confidence.
That is an interesting aspect of it. So tell me, Kathleen, what is your truth now?
I think my truth now is really focused on what I struggled with for so long, and wanting to prove everyone wrong is the exact thing that made me successful today. And I think the one thing that I'm still struggling with a bit is my success, and how I define success isn't determined by how others see me. And as somebody who, in a way, has spent most of their life letting people disappointing others, oftentimes, which is what it feels like, I have over-indexed on some people pleasing. And I think, trying to sit in a little bit more of what I want is a big part of my new truth, is challenging myself a bit further. Okay, we understand that dyslexia and dysgraphia is not something to hide. It's something to embrace and share with others. I talk about it openly. And oftentimes hear people come up to me afterwards, say, appreciative of it. And now I'm on to my next, hurdle of trying to really look at myself and say, what am I trying to prove and why? And making sure I'm doing that for the right reasons.
And what do you tell your son now that you're in the mom's shoes and he has similar superpowers?
I think I tell him, it's interesting. He gets frustrated fairly easily. If something he's not good at something right away, he just sometimes will crumble. Mm-hmm. And I try to talk to him about the fact that it's not always about the end result, that you can learn so much in the process. And that is just as important as the final output, if you will, or the final grade. And I don't know if he's listening entirely, but I keep trying to help encourage that. And it's funny, I also have been like highlighting my flaws a bit more, like, oh, I failed at this, so that he can see that failure doesn't mean you can't be successful. Mm-hmm. And in the contrary, I think it's quite opposite. If you don't fail, I don't know how you can be very successful. And so I've been really kind of leaning into that with him. And it's funny, the other day when I've been trying to talk to him a little bit more about his dyslexia and that diagnosis, because I know he's wondering to himself, like, what's wrong with me? And I was like, your brain works like mommy's brain. You and mommy's brain work a lot alike, not like daddy's. And mommy has been pretty successful, and you're going to be just as successful if you put your mind to it, like if you try and you want it. And he goes, you're successful? Were you a boss? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, but daddy's smarter. And I was like, no, first off, yes, daddy's smart. Don't get me wrong. He doesn't see that side of me as much. And so I was like, no, listen, I have the same brain as you, and I've been very successful. And yeah, I barely graduated high school in a lot of ways. It's okay.
Yeah.
Develop that passion for learning. Do what you love and do it with all of your heart and work hard.
And advice for influencers in children's lives, not just parents, but, mentors, coaches, counselors, the teachers, like the people that told you no. How can we guide them in supporting neurodivergent children?
I would say be mindful of the fact of the power of your words. Mm-hmm. And then take the time to get to know them and what makes them tick, and create a space where they can excel, whatever it may be. I remember my second grade teacher, Mrs. Smith, very vividly. I couldn't write, couldn't spell to save my life. I wrote a poem, random, we had an assignment where we had to write a poem, and I wrote a poem, and she pulled me aside and was like, this is good. You have a gift. I want you to develop it. And she actually helped sent it in to some poetry contest, and I got published, right? Or, it got picked at one or whatever. And so I think, especially for kids who are neurodivergent, we're constantly failing, and we always feel like sometimes it's never enough and we're never going to be enough. Mm-hmm. So find their strength and let them win and succeed and celebrate that a little bit so that they can have that momentum to continue to do the things that are not easy for them.
For those who are listening who are neurodivergent leaders, what do you want them to know about their perceived limitations?
I would say, first thing I would tell them is drop the mask. Step one, drop the mask. It's way harder to keep that up, and lean into it and be open about it. Anyone listening on this call probably feels a little bit of a head spin right now because my thoughts are all over the place. And that is true in most of my meetings as well. And I try to be mindful of when I use that. But I think it's okay to let people in on the chaos or the struggle. And it makes you so much more human. And lean into the intuitive aspects of what you've done and what you've built over the years because of that neurodivergence, whether that's creative problem solving, understanding people well, working well with people, lean into that because those are huge skills. And to a certain extent, like, don't beat yourself up on the stuff that you're still not great at. I keep a notebook and I do this thing where, this is going to sound so silly, but like I Marie Kondo my mind. And so like, as I'm writing stuff, if I'll do like a little plus sign on something that like sparked joy that I worked on or that I found interesting. And then I go back every week and I start to think about like, oh, what sparked joy in my brain this week?
Yeah.
When I plan for the next week, spend more time doing that and pulling off the other things on my list that don't spark joy and are probably not a good use of my skill set.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been such a fun deep dive into your brain, and I've loved this. So thank you for showing us that what we think might be a barrier can actually become the force that breaks through it. Your story proves that neurodivergence isn't a flaw to fix. It's a different lens that can see opportunities others miss. So here's to turning what was once your kryptonite into your greatest superpower. You're truly a Wonder Woman, Kathleen. And if you're interested in reading about Kathleen's perspectives or to get a copy of her book, visit the resources page on liesmyego.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, leave us a review, and share your favorite episode. And don't forget to tag us. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me. I hope it's been beneficial and or a slightly nonlinear path of my thinking, which has been fun.
Mine too, I think, today.
Thanks, Catherine.